discussing very adamantly their living wills. And the husband is really adamant about his wishes. And so he turns to his wife and he says, just so you know, I never want to be in one of those vegetative states. You know, dependent on some machine with fluids coming out from a bottle. And then he looks at her and he says, if I ever get to that state, I want you to pull the plug immediately. And with that, the wife thinks. She gets up, unplugs the TV, and pours out all this beer. Do you know what anyone in that kind of state attached to something that they can't get rid of? Now, I know when I shared with you that sermon series about generations, we talked about how our children and youth are attached to their phones. And it got me wondering. You see, I like science fiction. And there's kind of an intriguing concept about that talks about a possible future. And it goes something like this. And I've seen it in several shows where something happens and all electronics is done for, is ended. And so it got me wondering. And so usually in these shows, what usually happens is it occurs by a bomb, or maybe so there's some kind of mysterious force that just ceases all electronics to happen. So it got me wondering, what would happen if tomorrow we were to wake up and all electronics were to end at all? And I have a hunch. I believe that you and I would be okay. It would be a struggle, but we would learn to somehow adapt because we remember what life is like before we were so dependent on electronics. But take our children and youth. They know nothing but electronics. And I think, what do you think they would do if they were to wake up tomorrow and all the electronics would end? Think they'd walk around just kind of looking at their hands all the time? Would they just curl up into a ball? Would they cease to exist? This generation, we know, is tethered to their electronics. Now, it might sound like I'm picking on our children and youth, but each one of us is tethered to something. It might be a phone. It might be a TV. It might be a car. Take away someone's driver's license and they will tell you how tethered they are to a car. Are you tethered to a job? To a career? I one time served a community that was in a county that had the highest suicide rate of males in their 60s and 70s in the state. And I asked a fellow pastor about this, and he told me in the cases that he knew of, they were all farmers who had recently retired and moved to town. Now, we don't know for certain if it was the farming to retirement to town that led to the suicide, but it got you to wonder. How about where you live? Are you tethered to a community? When I was working for the credit union, I one time received a phone call from a headhunter. That's actually what he called himself. His job was to match banks with bankers for possible jobs. And he had heard about me, and he asked if I was interested in moving to Cozad, Nebraska to be an ag banker. I said, the problem was my house was here. My family was here. Call me back if you know of anything local. You see, I had done that for a year. When my family moved down here to Gearing, I was still pastoring Chadron. I was driving every week back and forth, and I wasn't willing to do that again. What are you tethered to? It reminds me of the story of a man that was walking by some elephants. And he notices this one elephant is just tied to really just kind of a minor rope to stick in the ground. And he sees this magnificent, powerful, beautiful, majestic elephant who could just at any moment get out of that stake. And he's thinking, why doesn't he? And so he finds a trainer nearby and he goes up to him and he says, why isn't that elephant trying to escape? And the trainer says, well, when they were young and much smaller, we used the same size rope to tie them. And at that age, it's enough to hold them. As they grow up, they're conditioned to believe they cannot break away. They believe the rope can still hold them, so they never try to break free. The man was amazed. These animals could at any time break free from their bonds, but they believed that they couldn't. They were stuck right where they are. You know, sometimes our tethers are right up here in our minds. Put placed there for 1,000 reasons. Fortunately, Christ offers us something different. Sue?
I will be reading today from Galatians 5, 1, and then skipping over between 13 and 25. For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. Live by the Spirit. I say, and do not gratify the desires of the flesh. For what the flesh desires is opposed to the Spirit, and what the Spirit desires is opposed to the flesh. For these are opposite to each other, to prevent you from doing what you want. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not subject to the law. Now the work of the flesh are obvious: fornication, impurity, licentiousness, idolatry, sorcery, strife, jealousy, anger, quarrels, dissension, faction, envy, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these. I am warning you, as I warned you before, those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. By contrast, the fruits of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There are no laws against such things, and those who belong to Jesus Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also be guided by the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, competing against one another, envying one another.
I've titled today's message, Freedom. And if you're a fan of Dave Ramsey, you know what takes place on Fridays on his radio show. People who are debt-free, they can call up and they can yell on the radio show, "I'm debt-free!" And then what does he do is he splices in the words from Mel Gibson from the movie Braveheart, freedom. Now, I will tell you, if you're tethered to the believing that the movie Braveheart is actually what happens to William Wallace, I read the book and I hate to tell you, there's no last words, and he's not executed. Anyway, besides the point, Paul here is not talking about nationalism or patriotism or even Edward the Longshanks. He's talking about our tethers, our anchors, our ropes. I mean, look at this verse again. Live by the Spirit, I say, and do not gratify the desires of the flesh. Desires of the flesh, he calls them. And if you're unsure what they are, he's got a list right there. These desires of the flesh are what we are tethered to. Now, it might not be a TV, or to a car, or to electronics, or to a job, or even to a community. But it might be to a tradition that doesn't work anymore. I've recently started reading a book by Ed Catmull, who is the president and founder of Pixar. And I just started the book, and so he's kind of early in his career. And he goes to work for a guy by the name of George Lucas right after he comes out with a movie called Star Wars. Ever heard of him?
Yeah.
So Lucas is looking for a way to edit film faster. And Catmull's job is to come up with a system to make it happen. Listen to what he writes in the book. While George wanted this new video editing system in place, the film editors at Lucasfilm did not. They were perfectly happy with the system they already mastered, which involved actually cutting film into snippets with razor blades and then pasting them back together. They couldn't have been less interested in making changes that would slow them down in the short term. They took comfort in their familiar ways, and change meant being uncomfortable. And then he writes, because the people our new system was intended to serve were resistant to it, progress screeched to a halt. I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the book. Maybe it's not a tradition we're tethered to. Maybe it's a practice that creates harm, or to a belief system that keeps us separate. A Reverend Adrian DeMille tells about a service at St. Bartholomew's Church in New York City. When a guy comes in wearing a tall hat, and he comes all the way down and he sits in the front row. And an usher sees him, and he sees that he's not taking his hat off. And so this usher comes down and he tells the guy, can you take your hat off? And the guy doesn't do it. So he goes back and he summons the head usher. The head usher comes down and he says, sir, can you take your hat off? Yeah, he does not take off his hat. By now, the head of the women's organization gets involved. And she comes on down, and she has the same dismal results. With 2 minutes to spare before the church is to start, the head senior warden of the church comes down and actually attempts to grab the hat, but the guy dodges him. By then it's too late, the procession's already coming in. And with the procession coming in, everyone stands, the guy takes off his hat, lays it off to the side, and never puts it back on. After church, those four people are waiting to talk to him. And they say, and the senior warden says, sir, about that hat, perhaps you don't understand, but in our church, men do not wear hats of worship. And the man replies, oh, I do understand. I've been part of this denomination all my life. As a matter of fact, I've been coming to this church regularly for 2 years, and I've never met a soul. But today I've met four people: an usher, the head of the women's group, and the senior warden. So where's the hope in that? Our tethers, what Paul calls the desires of the flesh, keep us running in a direction that is away from God. Here's the thing about these tethers, these desires of the flesh, the ones he's got listed there. They are good now, and they are great to chase, but they don't last. Now, let me tell you about greyhound racing. It is a popular sport attracting a lot of crowds in many places in our country. People go, they look at these beautiful, sleek dogs, and they are running so fast around that track. Now, these greyhounds, they don't have jockeys on them, so what they do is they train them to chase that mechanical bunny rabbit around the track. And there's a guy up in a press box that is always controlling that bunny rabbit to make sure that that bunny is always out in front of the dogs, and the dogs never catch up. Well, there's one story, it goes like this, that there was a big race going on down in Florida, and the dogs were put in the cages, and they were all ready, and the betting concludes, and the gun goes off, and the guy presses the bunny rabbit box, and the bunny rabbit takes off, and the doors open, and the dogs are running out after the bunny rabbit, and they come through, everything's going fine around that first turn, and then all of a sudden the bunny, there's an electrical short, and explodes, goes up into flames. And all that's left is just a black gunk on the end of a wire. So what do you think these dogs did? Well, a couple of them, they just kind of sat right on the track with their tongues hanging out their mouths. Two of them were so frenzied by the chase, they kept on running, ran right into a wall, broke a couple ribs. One began to chase its tail, and the rest just began to howl at everyone in the crowd. Not one dog finished the race. I want you to say something with me. I want everyone to say freedom.
Freedom.
Now, I want you to say it the way Mel Gibson does in Braveheart. Say, freedom! Freedom! There we go. Now, we're not talking about freedom such as an anarchy or loose living or living with no responsibility. Those are the desires of the flesh. I'm talking about freedom from your tethers. They keep us from reaching the potential that God has for us. Because when we live our life to gratify the desires of the flesh, Paul is saying we're chasing a rabbit. And it's okay until that rabbit stops and goes up in flames. And there's no hope in that. It may look like hope at the time. I mean, chasing rabbits sure looks good. Pursuing something on that list that Paul talks about sure feels good. Being tethered to something that doesn't work may seem like hope at the time. Because that rabbit sure is moving. But in the long term, it's just a metal rabbit controlled by some guy in a press box. Say it with me one more time. Freedom! You know, the fruits of the Spirit are so different. Now look at this list. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. Talk about a great list. But to Paul's readers, there's no hope in this. I mean, this list won't get you a promotion. It won't satisfy an urge. It won't fulfill something that you're desiring. And when you're thinking about that list, about traditions that you're tethered to, or those practices or belief systems that seem to be working, Paul is yelling freedom. The desires of the flesh don't last. There's no hope in that. Yell it again with me. Come on. Freedom! Cut those tethers. Call out freedom. That is hope. I want to end today with a story by preacher Fred Craddock. Fred's a great preacher, great storyteller. He tells about a time that he was visiting one of his students. Just had recently graduated. And so as he was visiting there, the parents decide to get the kids off to bed and kind of leaves Fred alone with the family pet, who is this large, sleek greyhound. Now earlier in the evening, Fred was watching this greyhound just roll around on the floor. The kids were having a great time with this family pet. At one point, the dad says, "That's a full-blooded greyhound there," he says. He once raced professionally down in Florida. Then we got him. Great dog with that kids, that greyhound. Well, there's Fred, alone with this greyhound dog, and tongue firmly planted in his cheek. Fred says, "This is true." The greyhound actually turns to him and says, "This your first visit to Connecticut?" And undaunted by a talking dog, Fred answered, "No, I went to school up here a long time ago." "Well, I guess you heard I came up here from Miami," said the greyhound. "Oh yeah, you retired?" Fred asked. "No, is that what they told you?" replied the greyhound. No, I didn't retire. I tell you, I spent 10 years as a professional racing greyhound. That means 10 years of running around that track day after day, 7 days a week, and others chasing that rabbit. One day I got up close. I got a good look at that rabbit. It was fake. I had spent my whole life chasing a fake rabbit. Hey, I didn't retire. I quit. Is that how you feel about your life? Are you chasing a fake rabbit? Isn't it time that you gave yourself something more? You know, there are millions of people in this world that will tell you they are bored to tears. Remember that poor guy in my first story I shared with you about the guy whose wife went unplugged, pulled the plug? What do you imagine is his greatest complaint when he's watching TV? I think he's going, "Honey, there is nothing on. We have 100 channels and I can't find anything to watch." Surely that isn't the meaning of life. Let me tell you what the meaning of life is. Love God. Serve God faithfully. Love your neighbor. And find a meaningful avenue of service to others. That's it. That's the meaning of life. Simple formula. And if you adopt it, it'll be the driving philosophy that will enrich you immensely. And perhaps you will find freedom. Say it with me one more time. Come on. Freedom! Look beyond these tethers to the grand scheme of the world. I think you'll find hope. And in that freedom, it will allow you to follow God to the meaning of life. See the ushers waiting back there? They are ready let's get back.